Coming up here on the Metal Command Show, I talk about my favorite Ozzy Osbourne solo album of all time, the 50th anniversary reissue of Judas Priest and their debut album, Rocka Rolla. I talk about Warlord and why I believe they should continue to record albums and tour. And of course, Paul Stanley blames the media for the American population being divided politically. That's all coming up next here on the Metal Command Podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command Podcast.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you. As always, I do appreciate any support you all show me for this program. So if you like what you see and hear on this show, please, by all means, hit the subscribe button. Hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And of course, if you are following this on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a like and a follow there. And it's a glorious Sunday, November 24th, 2024. And I'm here to talk about quite a few things today. So a lot of people have emailed me about basically asking what is my favorite Ozzy Osbourne solo album. I'm going to talk about the Judas Priest reissue of Rocka Rolla, and I'm going to talk about the band Warlord and why I think they should keep recording records and touring. But first, let me get to the main headline out there, and that is Paul Stanley. Paul Stanley, of course, has had a lot of tweets and a lot to say about the presidential election, and he is blaming the media for the most part for the divide in America. And let me read this quote. This actually, I found this on blabbermouth.net, and it was a quote with the Rock of Nations show. And the quote goes as follows. Let me read this. Obviously, it's sad to see a country divided, a country as great as this one, and in part or in large part, I have to look at the media. And I could be very naive, but to me, the inception of 24-hour news turned the news into something more like Entertainment Tonight. It became polished to a point where the presenters had more talent as far as being telegenic than being journalists. Okay. I agree and disagree with him. I disagree with him that the media is the reason we have the divide in America, or at least the main reason. I do agree with him where he says the presenters have more talent as far as being telegenic. I mean, basically looking good on TV than being journalists. And I'll totally 100% agree with him on that. Because the latter, where he talks about them being more telegenic than being journalists, is why people gravitate to podcasts and why that trend is going to continue. Because people are sick of, the fakeness that you see on TV and the fakeness of a lot of these shows that you see on television. I barely watch TV anymore because of that. I mainly follow podcasts, and I like to research information and look things up for myself. And I really couldn't care less about most of these presenters on any kind of mainstream media. That's just how I am. But I'm going to go to the part where I disagree with him, because he says you have to look at the media. It basically says, and in part or in large part, I have to look at the media. Folks, the media is not the cause of the divide. They do play a role in it, but it's not in a manner that many of you think. So the question is, what is the cause of the divide? Now, so many people, what they'll do, the first two things they point to is that, number one, they point to politicians. This politician says stuff that's divisive. This politician says divisive things. This person says stuff that divides people. They will point at media entities. So, like, for example, I'm just going to throw it out there. They will point at CNN and Fox. CNN being, on the left, and then Fox being on the right. And that the media is responsible for dividing people and having this big divide between everybody. But are they really causing it? Do politicians really divide people? Or do people divide people? Folks, people are the reason that we have the divide. Because here's what I'm going to tell you. There is no media outlet. there is no politician here in the United States of America that is holding a gun to anybody's head or holding anybody hostage and basically telling them, you believe what I say and you buy into what I say or else. People have free choice and they make the decision. Sorry, let me get out of this window here. They make the decision as to whether or not they choose to believe the rhetoric that comes out of the mouth of a politician or the rhetoric being spewed about when it comes to the mainstream media. I'm not a big mainstream media guy. I think it's not about journalism. It's about ratings. It's about entertainment. That's the one thing I do agree with when Paul Stanley says it's more like Entertainment Tonight. I mean, that's basically what a lot of these outlets are looking to do. But ultimately, people are the reason we are divided, and they choose to be divided. Now, why is that? Where does that come from? Here's the thing. People internally, they have beliefs, they have convictions, they have narratives that they want to believe. And a lot of people see things as they want them to be and not what they actually are. So, for example, when people have their beliefs and their convictions, there's a power that has over them. And if there are things out there that may essentially debunk those beliefs, they ignore it and they do not want it to be true. And if you do have information that is factually correct, that would basically debunk somebody's belief system, well, guess what, folks? You are the enemy. That's how they view you. And unfortunately, that is the society we live in. A lot of people are very uncomfortable going out of that zone of their beliefs system and their convictions to go seek information that could, how can I say it, contradict or debunk their belief system. They don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. You know, we call this cognitive theory. If you follow Jonathan Haidt, he's a great author. He talks a lot about this. Essentially, you have cognitive comfort and cognitive discomfort. And most people want to stay in their comfort zone. They won't leave that. Now, why is that important? Because most people are not critical thinkers, and they have an emotional attachment to the things they want to believe in. Instead of using logic, most people have become emotional, and they become attached to narratives that they want to believe are true, to beliefs and convictions, and that's where the problem comes in. And then that's when the media comes in. You know, they gravitate to a source in the media that is everything they want to hear, that makes them feel good and feel comfortable. They won't go and look on the other side of the media for things that could possibly contradict that belief system. Now, me personally, I'm a critical thinker. One of the things that helped me with that was being on a debate team, because when the first rule of debate team, what do? Or even like a lawyer that's a litigator. In order to learn the truth about things, you have to be able to argue for both sides of an issue. And you'd be surprised how much you can learn when you are able to argue for both sides of an issue, because not only do you understand the other side, but you might find information that actually can contradict your belief system. Sometimes that happens. And, you know, a lot of people don't want to do that. Now, in America, and I'm going to kind of simplify this a little bit, let's take a look at the two political parties, for example. People will blindly believe every single thing, let's say, the Republican Party says. And they will blindly believe everything that the Democrats say. And what will happen is anything bad that the opposing side does, they will be quick to point it out. But if the side that they love, let's say you're a Democrat, for example, and you know your party does the same thing the Republicans did that's bad, you won't point it out. You'll overlook it because you do not want to believe that your side could be bad in any way. And then the people that don't subscribe to that are critical thinkers, they're kind of left out, they're kind of left out in a sense. I look at it like religion. So each political party, to me, it's like a religious cult, right? Your policies and beliefs within that political party is basically the religious doctrine. The priests or the people that you worship are the politicians, and the loyal followers are the people that are blindly loyal to that party. And then the people that are critical thinkers, kind of in the middle, we are the atheists. We are the people that should be burned at the stake because we don't subscribe blindly to those things. We seek out information, and we are not afraid to seek out information that could contradict our beliefs. And that's very few, and very few people are like that in society. And pretty much this is where the divide comes in. People have too much emotional attachment to what they want to believe to be true instead of what is actually true. And that is where that is the problem that we have. And what the media does and what politicians do is they see that. And because people are so emotional over this stuff, it makes them easier to, it makes saying things, it makes it easier to manipulate. People allow themselves to be manipulated by their emotional attachments to their beliefs and convictions and the narratives that they want to believe are true, whether they are or not. So I'll give you an example. Someone like myself, I don't subscribe to one side or the other. My political beliefs, for example, 25 years ago, I was considered a liberal, and now I'm considered a right-winger, or at least like just right of center, essentially, is what most people would consider me. So, but I'm more of a critical thinker. I don't really take a side. I look at things for what they are. So when I do that, what happens is most people can't comprehend that it's possible to think that way. So, for example, if I go and I say something, let's say, for example, someone on the left puts a post up, it's factually untrue, and if I put something up that contradicts that information, automatically I'm an evil right-winger. Because they can't fathom that someone would be kind of a free-thinking individual, and they have to put you in a category. If someone on the right posts something that is factually untrue, and I post information that refutes it, I'm automatically an evil, commie liberal. And I've had that said to me before. And I'm definitely, anybody that knows me knows I'm definitely not. So this is what happens. And so what ends up happening then is when people get their belief system questioned and there are things out there pointed out to them that contradicts it, not only do they not want to know that, but they get angry because they get an anxiety over the fact that something is out there that could contradict their beliefs, and then they point at you as the bad guy and refuse to acknowledge it. And unfortunately, that is where the divide comes in. So while I agree with Paul Stanley, the thing is, folks, the media is not to blame. It's people allowing themselves to fall into the abyss by blindly believing media and basically people not willing to leave their comfort zone. And that is where the divide comes in. Because here's the thing, folks, if every single person was willing, or at least a large majority, let's say like 80% of the population or 90% of the population would leave their comfort zone to look for information that could contradict their beliefs or contradict what the media says or contradict what a politician that they worship says, the media would be more accountable. Politicians would be more accountable because then they wouldn't be able to manipulate people in the way that they do now. And that, folks, is the underlying problem. That is why we are where we are. I mean, it's just essentially what it is. Let me give you another example of people not wanting to find information that may contradict their beliefs. Let's say, for example, someone posts something on Facebook. You put a link up that refutes and contradicts and proves that post wrong, whatever information that might be. They will look at the source of the information and automatically dismiss it without researching it. Oh, it's the New York Post. Oh, it's CNN. Oh, it's Fox. It must not be true. That's bullshit. That's like, that's just right-wing or left-wing talking points. They won't look at what the argument is that the media source is trying to make. Number one, that's very common, and it displays intellectual laziness. But number two, if you really want to see if the argument that media source is making is correct or not, go into the article, go look at the sources of where they ended up getting their information from. Like, for example, if they talk about, I don't know, let's say they talk about taxes, right? And they have an article up, a headline. It has whatever content in there that they're trying to talk about. You can go look up the raw numbers of, say, the IRS on irs.gov. They may list that in the resources of where they ended up getting their information. And then guess what? You could see if that article is factually true or untrue. But most people don't want to do that. Most people do not want to look for information that could possibly contradict them. So it's sad and it's unfortunate. And while I think Paul Stanley is somewhat correct, the media is basically exploiting people's emotional attachments to their narratives. But ultimately, people are blindly believing those things. And that is why I say people are the reason for the divide. I'm going to leave you with one more thing in this segment. Folks, every single day in person, I interact with people from all ethnicities, from every religion you can think of, from every skin color, people from different countries. I interact with them all in person. You know what, folks? 95% of the time, everybody's cool, everybody's nice, everybody's hospitable. But as soon as you get a lot of these same people on social media, they go nuts. And then they start going nuts over politics and flipping out on people online, when in person, most of these folks are actually really nice people. I want you to remember that because, again, those people choose to act that way, and they allow social media and what gets posted on there to get to them. And that is another reason why I believe people are the cause of the divide. Okay, now, transitioning over to something more positive. Judas Priest. The 50th anniversary of Rocka Rolla. The debut album came out 50 years ago. It has been remixed and remastered, so it has a different sound to it. By the way, I think it sounds a lot better. But I'll be honest with you. Listening to the reissue, that is the first time in probably 30 years that I have listened to the first Judas Priest album. In fact, I almost forgot it even existed. In fact, I remember people back in the days when I hosted my radio show calling in, hey, can I hear something off the first Judas Priest album? And I would be like, Rocka Rolla? And they would say, no, Sad Wings of Destiny. What's Rocka Rolla? Because to me, Rocka Rolla is probably the most forgotten Judas Priest album of all time. I mean, how many people think to themselves, hey, I'm going to go listen to Judas Priest? Am I going to listen to Painkiller? Am I going to listen to Defenders of the Faith? Am I going to listen to Firepower? Most people aren't going out and saying, hey, I want to listen to Rocka Rolla. You just don't hear of people doing that or saying that. But it's just one of those albums in their catalog people completely forget about. And it's funny because I had almost forgotten what that album sounded like and what the song sounded like on that, because I just don't think of that record when I want to go listen to Judas Priest. I'm thinking of Painkiller. I'm thinking of Screaming for Vengeance, British Steel. You know, that's essentially where I go with that. And, you know, it's one of those things where you're kind of like, they reissued it? Really? So obviously, I went back and listened to the album and listened to the reissue. A couple things. Number one, that record is completely different from anything they've ever done. Is it up there as one of my favorite Priest albums? Probably not. And what's even funnier about people forgetting that that album even existed is the fact that back in the 90s, early 2000s, they had a like double reissue of Sad Wings of Destiny and Rocka Rolla, but people would just see the cover and think, oh, that's Sad Wings of Destiny. So there are actual people that have emailed me or have called me when I used to do my radio show and essentially forgot that debut album existed. Now, it had a really funny cover, had a little Coke bottle cap on it, and it said Rocka Rolla on it. I mean, but folks, it's their debut album from the 70s. Personally, for me as a record, it has always been probably in bottom 2 or 3 records they probably have ever put out. Like, I would definitely listen to it over Nostradamus, for example, or maybe a couple other Priest albums. But I do appreciate the fact they did bring attention to that record. It also goes back to when I talk about reissues bringing relevance back to certain albums that people may have forgotten about. I think it's cool that they did it. Because I'll tell you what, I would have never probably even listened to that album again if they hadn't reissued it. So props to them for drawing attention to the Rocka Rolla album, the debut album. I think that album is phenomenal. As far as the way they made it sound. But, you know, it's probably in the lower tier for me as far as albums go by Judas Priest. Nice to see where they came from, and it's interesting to listen to. And I might want to add here, too, that they did a great job remixing it and making it sound great. And it's nice they drew attention to the record. Maybe most people, there's probably a lot of people that never really listened to it or gave it an actual listen. I mean, like I said, haven't heard it in 30 years, went and listened to it. But again, I mean, the songs are what they are, but they did improve the sound quite a bit. So if you are on the fence about buying it, if you've heard the record and you like it and you're on the fence about the reissue, I can tell you they made a huge improvement on the sound. So props to Judas Priest. It's nice to see them. And it's cool because it's something that I remember when I saw the news, the press release on it, I was like, oh, pretty cool. They're putting Rocka Rolla out again. And I had just essentially forgotten about that album. So I'm going to go into break. I will see you all next. I'm going to talk about Warlord and why they should continue to record records and tour. And, of course, I'm going to tell all of you what my favorite Ozzy Osbourne album of all time actually is and why. All of that coming up after this. Hey, everybody. Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching. And if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support. Okay, back here on the Metal Command podcast. Let's talk about the band Warlord. As many of you know, I am an avid fan of Warlord. I've loved Warlord for a long time. They are one of those like cult classic bands that, you know, every few years they'd put a record out. I mean, they really, in the past, didn't play tons of shows. I have always thought Bill Samus was a phenomenal guitar player and songwriter. I did follow his other band, Lordy and Guard, as well, back in the day. But obviously, Bill, sadly and unfortunately, passed away not long ago. But the band decided to continue. They put a brand new album out called Free Spirit Soar. It has some of Bill's guitar parts on there. It has a lot of his music on there. Some of it played by Bill, some of it played by the rest of the guys in the band. And of course, as many of you who follow the podcast, as many of you know, I had Mark Zonder on the show. He's the original drummer, the only original member in the band. And then, of course, Giles Lavery, who sings for the band as well. Giles, of course, singing with Alcatraz. I believe he's going to be singing on the next Jack Starr album. Giles has also done a lot of really cool stuff, like, co-hosting shows at the Metal Voice. He's worked for labels. He has managed bands. I mean, he's done pretty much everything in the music business, so he's a pretty knowledgeable guy. And actually, that interview was really cool. But I had Giles on at one point, and then I had Mark Zonder on at one point. And now that I've had a chance to revisit the Warlord catalog, which has all been reissued by High Roller Records, who did a great job reissuing all of those albums, I have had a chance to really listen to their new album, Free Spirit Soar, for most of the year. And the more I listen to that album, the more I think to myself, man, I think these guys should continue to record albums and tour. Now, hear me out. In the very beginning, when they announced this record, there was a lot of people hemming and hawing and protesting and, saying that they shouldn't be doing that because Bill passed away, and when Bill passed away, the band should end. And then later on, Giles, or Mark, I think it was Giles, in an interview, posted a lot of the emails where Bill Samus was telling them, hey, you should continue the band, take my music and run with it, keep the thing going, don't let it die, essentially. And I think that shut a lot of haters up. And then what shut even more haters up is the fact that the album was really, really good and really did justice to the legacy in the past that Warlord has built up over the past, say 40 years. However, the more I listen to it, the more I think to myself, man, I would love to hear more records by this band. And they should continue to tour, because Warlord was really not a band that was playing tons of shows back in the day. So I think Bill's music is great, and I think it really needs to continue to be brought to an audience for as long as possible. Now, I had... when I did have Mark and Giles on, one of the things we did talk about to debunk the whole, the band should die and, because Bill passed away, I'm going to let Mark reflect on that a little bit for some of you here. And I want you to check this interview segment out where Mark talks about continuing on without Bill Samus. Check this out.
It was a difficult decision, but it wasn't a difficult decision. And people ask me all the time, well, Mark, when Bill first passed away, he said, oh, there's not going to be any more Warlord, and blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, a guy passes away. What am I going to do? Hey, 2 weeks from now, Warlord's going on tour, and hey, I had this record I kept to myself, and we're going to put it out. I just needed some time. And then Giles basically came around, and I've known Giles forever, for a long time, and, he's managed various bands, and, the Warlord stuff, he sang with Warlord, he did a song on one of the albums, did the live stuff. And he just said, hey, how do you feel about, just taking control of this and let's go do this, And I always thought that, and Bill had told me flat out, hey, because he was people don't know, he was very ill. He was ill for a good 20 years or so. I remember recording Rising Out of the Ashes in New York before I was even married in the late 1990s. Mm-hmm. And he comes in with a big satchel of drugs that he had to take he had a gastro problem, which is, when that happens, you just can't even get out of bed. So he said, hey, just go get another guitar player, man. He goes, just make sure he plays what he's supposed, and just go play. He goes, I want the music to spread. I want the music to be alive. And you got to remember, Warlord didn't do 40 world tours or anything like that, so it's not like we exhausted the live thing. I used to love playing that stuff. I mean, I still love playing it. So also, when Giles came to me, he showed me these emails that Bill had sent to him, saying, hey, if something happens and I'm not here, I want you guys to take it and move it forward. Because Bill and Giles were a lot better friends than Bill and I were. Bill and I were business partners and music guys, and we had the ultimate respect for each other. Never had an argument, which is kind of interesting in a band. Never an argument. Not even a disagreement, really. We just respected each other. You do what you do, I do what I do, and we're good. But him and Giles were like buddies. You know, Giles would go there for months at a time and just hang out. And so Giles really knew him, per se. And when he said that he wanted us to keep going with the stuff and to put it out and everything, you know, I didn't have a problem with it. You know, what people really have to realize, you know, besides getting over themselves, is the fact that the guy died. We did not kick him out of the band. You know, we didn't hijack something. He died. He's got his wishes. Tells Giles in emails, hey, take my stuff and go play it. He tells me, get another guitar player and just go play my stuff. I didn't want to do that when he was still alive. I didn't think that was right. So there we are. And, you know, Giles, Eric, the guitar player, and Jimmy Waldo, the keyboard player, are the guys who really did the heavy lifting. Philip and I sat back and played the drums and the bass. We went through stuff that I had in my computer that Bill and I had been working on since like 2016. Because after we played that last gig in Chania, that festival, we talked about going back and doing a Deliver Us style 3 to 4 minute rock songs, not the big epic, not the big keyboards, just, you know, old school metal. And so we started putting stuff together, and he was just so sick he couldn't get it to the album state. So I had a bunch of stuff in my computer, his actual guitar tracks, you know. There was other stuff on tapes and stuff that we pulled that Giles had, that Bill had given Giles, and they basically put it together, you know. Is it 105% all Bill? No, because certain things were like ideas. Certain things were, you know, just 4 bars of something maybe. So they did a lot of heavy lifting to put it together and put it in song form. The whole idea behind it, everybody going into it knew this has to be Warlord and this has to be Bill. This isn't the new reggae version of Warlord. This is not the new metal version of Warlord. Okay, we have to keep it there. Eric, the guitar player, studied Bill. He knew all the whole Greek thing that Bill was doing. He studied his sound. He copped all those old, nasty 1980s Electric Mistress, Strat, Marshall making a whole bunch of noise kind of sound. And Jimmy did the same thing. Went back and studied all the keyboards. Oh, that's a Mini Moog, and that's this. So coming together, the one of the main concerns was just having it sound with the Warlord sound. Just like we did back in the day, we're not sampling drums. I kind of approached this how I would have in the 1980s. I didn't get into it too heavy and too deep and really make it proggy or try to make it like, you know, like what I would do probably now with something to try to be creative. It's keeping it in that same 80s metal vein, and I think we really accomplished that.
And that's Mark talking about his relationship with Bill and talking about the fact Bill wanted to keep the band going. Now, one of the things I talked about with Giles, I said, hey, will you consider putting out another record? And this is what Giles Lavery, the singer of Warlord, had to say about that.
Now that you've put this album out, you know, have you thought about it? Has anyone asked you, and I don't know if they have, of even after this album comes out, of making another record in the future? Or is this maybe going to be it and you just keep playing live and playing the songs?
I think it will really depend on how well this is received. You know, if the record does well and people like what we did, there's no reason not to do it. There's at least one more. There's still some Bill stuff, and I don't want to get to a point where we're scratching the bottom of the barrel. I mean, there has to be kind of decent amount of material to draw from. Again, you know, and I don't know. I mean, it's again something me and Mark would have to talk about. You know, how we would go about doing it, what it would be. You know, it's. You know, I mean, a few people have even asked, would you write some songs in the Warlord style? And I'm kind of, you know, I'm really kind of 50-50 on that to a degree, because Bill's music was a big part. I still like to have his spirit on any Warlord record is important to me. I mean, I'm not saying if someone wrote a song that was like, damn, this is like, without being a complete copy, this is like in that vein of the Deliver Us album, and it'll be like, wow, okay. I mean, again, we're all just talking very, very, very hypothetically here. So,
Yeah.
you know, before everyone starts getting out the pitchforks and burning torches yet again. So, who knows? It really depends. It depends on what the future holds, really.
Well, it's not something that's out of the question. I ask that because, and the reason I say that is that I think, like I said, I think the record is very good. I think most people are going to like it. I think a lot of the doubters are going to like it. You know, obviously you're always going to have those people that are, no matter what you do, they're going to say it's not Warlord or whatever. But
tribute band or whatever.
Yeah, that kind of thing. But I think, and I'll just give you my personal observation. I think the way this record came out, I really think you should do another one. So that's just me. You know, I'm just going by the vibe and the feel I get from this album. And, you know, the one thing that I get from, obviously Mark is still there. Mark is, from what I know of him, I've had him on my show a couple times. He's not someone that's going to do something half-assed, as we say here, right? And I think that ultimately, if Mark is going to put something out, you mentioned the A to Z album, it's going to be pretty damn good. I mean, that's just how I view him. You know,
I mean, with a lot of bands, when you say, "Well, who's the original guy?" and you go, "Well, they've still got the original drummer." A lot of people kind of think of, I don't know, like the Guess Who or something, you know, where it's like the least musically contributing member of the band, and it almost doesn't. It's almost like having no originals because it's just the drummer. Mark's not that drummer. If you take any Warlord song and you were to put another drummer on those tracks, it doesn't sound like Warlord. I mean, Lordy and Guard didn't sound like Warlord. But you put Mark's drums on those tracks and all of a sudden it does. Mark's a very musically involved drummer, and his style of drumming, it's almost like Neil Peart with Rush. You know, it's a intrinsic part of the music. It's not just a drummer and you could put another drummer in his place and it would be more or less the same, like a lot of bands do, change drummers. Like Accept, they can change drummer 4 more times, it'll still sound like Accept, because that's not where the sound of Accept is coming from. But the sound of Warlord was Bill and Mark, and Mark is a huge part of the Warlord sound. So in our case, it's very much different, you know.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I'll give people an example. When Dave Lombardo wasn't in Slayer anymore, they sounded a lot different, right? I mean, he just had an own distinct style. So it's probably the best analogy I could give as far as, when it comes, because some drummers, you get them out of the band, the sound is a lot different. And I think that's kind of the same kind of thing you're describing. If you were to put someone in the band aside from Mark, because Mark does have a pretty interesting style of playing, and even with like him in Fate's Warning, I mean, I think Fate's Warning sounded better when he joined the band. That's my opinion. But
wow, yeah, I mean, no disrespect to anyone. I mean, I'm whatever disclaimer I should put there, but wow, I mean, when Mark joined Fate's Warning, to me that's my Fate's Warning. Yeah, parallels, perfect symmetry, inside out. Man, that's my Fate's Warning right there.
Yeah, pleasant shade of gray.
Yep, exactly.
Giles Lavery talking about, would there ever be a possible second album after Free Spirits Soar? One of the things he does talk about, though, is, hey, he doesn't want to go for scraps of songs to put an album out. I understand that mentality. I understand that thought process. And, again, I understand that the songs have to be right and the vibe has to be there. Here's the thing. I am going to say that I think they should put not only another album out, but I think they should continue putting albums out when possible. Because I think they have the right guys in the band. Giles obviously knows what the songs and what kind of style sounds like Warlord and what kinds of songs would pretty much live up to the legacy that Bill Samos started. And folks, just because Bill is gone doesn't mean they can't continue. Riot, for example, I don't think they have any original members, and they continue to put out solid releases. They are keeping the legacy of that music alive. Riot's been around for a very long time. And they are still putting out quality albums. Stradivarius. Timo Tolkki's been out of that band for a long time. They continue to put out good albums. In fact, I think some of these new albums are the best ones they've ever done. Granted, Timo Cotapelto's been in the band now for, about 30 years. But they still put out quality albums. The point I'm trying to make is that I would love to see Warlord continue. I would love to see them tour as much as possible to promote that music and to keep Bill's music out there. Maybe even make the band a little bit bigger. Now, you're going to get those people that are going to say, oh my God, it's a cash grab. And these guys, first of all, because somebody said cash grab, I laughed because it's not like Warlord is playing huge arenas. It's not like these guys are making millions of dollars playing this music. They're playing it because they love the music and they want to keep it out there for everybody to enjoy. Not only from the live perspective, but for the fact they put this last record out. So for me personally, Free Spirit Soar, definitely a top 10 album for me, by the way, folks. Forgot to mention that. I think it's a great record. It's a great release. I would love to see the band continue to put out records if possible, if schedules allow, if the vibe is right. That is just my input as a fan, as somebody that likes the band. Keep it going, folks. That's really all I have to say about it. With that being said, let's transition into the last segment of this show today. I don't know where this came from. Numerous messages on Facebook asking me what is my favorite Ozzy album of all time. Don't know why it came up, but over the last year there have been some debates and some posts that I've put up that have pissed people off, about Ozzy and Dio, kind of comparing them in their careers, and a lot of people didn't like my take on it. And I always said that Ozzy had the better solo career. He had more quality albums than Dio did. They were kind of neck and neck as far as my own preferences, as far as albums are concerned, the first 3 or 4 records. But I think Ozzy's solo career was ultimately more successful. So people were asking me, even though I think Dio is the best singer Black Sabbath ever had, and I do like Ozzy's music, and I like his voice in Sabbath. So the question was, what is my favorite Ozzy album? Now, the first Ozzy album, solo album I ever heard was the tribute album, the live album, the Tribute to Randy Rhoads live album. I ended up buying that at a music store. It was probably about, 15 years old maybe. I bought it with allowance money. Blown away by the song I Don't Know. I was completely blown away by that song. I was blown away by that entire live record. One, it sounds fantastic. And number 2, the songs are phenomenal. And Randy Rhoads was phenomenal. And that was my start with Ozzy Osbourne, how I really got into his solo career. But my favorite Ozzy album, and I have the Legacy Super Deluxe Edition here, is this one. Diary of a Madman. By the way, if you don't have this Legacy Edition, it's pretty awesome. The album was remastered, and they have a live show. I don't know where that live show is recorded. I never really looked or paid attention. But it's really cool. Here's the thing, folks. I like Blizzard of Oz. I would probably actually have No More Tears as a close second to this, just because of the songs on it. That album came out around the time I was like in 8th grade, and it was all over the radio. And I loved, like Mama, I'm Coming Home, and a lot of those songs, Desire, And, they had the Hellraiser song that he did with Lemmy Kilminster. I love No More Tears. It's probably my second favorite Ozzy album, but Diary of a Madman is my favorite. The debut album I thought was good, but the second album is a little darker. I like the songwriting a lot better. It's kind of more of my preference. It's got a little bit of a darker theme to it. The title track is great. SATO is great. You Can't Kill Rock and Roll, Over the Mountain. I mean, every one of these songs resonates with me to this day. I actually went back and I was listening to Ozzy's back catalog. And I was like, Diary is it, man. It is. Now, Ozzy has had some great albums. He really has. And it was really actually pretty hard for me to pick my favorite album because of the fact that there were like 5 or 6 of them that I could have picked. Like Blizzard of Oz would probably be number 3 for me, at least. Bark at the Moon would be number 4. And like number 5, because that one's tough. I mean, the album that Gus G played on, probably. Maybe Osmosis. But overall, it's Diary. And I thought about it because when I go and I want to listen to Ozzy, this is the first record I'm going to. Actually, I'm actually curious where that live record, the live album, was recorded. Might tell me in the booklet. Really cool stuff, actually. Much nicer than the original booklet that they had for it, I can tell you that. Let's take a look. It was recorded. Well, the live album was mixed in 2010. Wow, this thing's old. I don't know. It doesn't really say. At least I don't see where it says this live recording was done. But really, really cool, actually. This is the album for me when it comes to Ozzy. And I go back to, I remember going out and buying this album shortly after I got the tribute album. I bought the Blizzard of Oz and I bought Diary of a Madman. I thought the songs actually sound better live than they do on the albums, but the albums are phenomenal. Doesn't really say. But it's got a cool track list. I Don't Know, Crazy Train, Believer, Mr. Crowley, Steal Away the Night, Suicide Solution. It's not the same show as the tribute show. Doesn't sound like it anyway. But this is it, folks. Diary of a Madman. I'm also curious as to what your favorite Ozzy Osbourne album actually is. And I don't really listen to Ozzy that often anymore, but I can always listen to this if I'm in the mood for it. I mean, this is one of those records where if someone mentions Ozzy and I want to hear his voice, believe it or not, even before any of the Black Sabbath stuff he did, I will go and listen to this record. That's all I pretty much have for today on this wonderful November 24th, 2024. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. If you like what you see and hear on this podcast, of course, hit the subscribe button and hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And, of course, on social media, if you want to support the show, if you see this on Facebook or Instagram or any place like that, by all means, give me a follow there. Thanks for watching and stay metal.